Hi, it's Rich Hoffman here. Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all? Or as they said in German in the original pre-Disney version, magic mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all? And yeah, it hurts. It hurt the evil queen when she expected to hear the mirror say, "Oh, you are, my dear." Instead, the mirror said, "Snow White is a prettier woman out there than you." And of course, we know the story. The evil queen seeks to destroy, kill someone who's a rival to her beauty. So she tries to poison her with an apple. And if you haven't noticed, I would say that's what's going on here. Is there's some soothsayers who see a weakening of the chain of the MAGA movement. They're trying to cause some trouble ahead of Trump's inauguration, because this is the system trying to defend itself from people like Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. And Vivek's in a lot of trouble. I wouldn't say he's in trouble. I agree with what he said. But he essentially said, look, the problems with American workers in the current state is they've been pretty much destroyed. I've said the same thing myself over and over again. But the problem is, it's a very layered problem. Problem is you have now a big tent party with lots of people that came into it. Labor unions came into it and voted for Trump. And now you have the ingredients that made a populist movement clashing with the elements of reality that we're dealing with. So you want to look in the mirror and say, "Mirror, mirror, tell me how beautiful I am. Look, we won an election and it's great and the world's going to be better." Now you have the problem of managing all that stuff. And the same skills that go to unifying people behind a message are not the same skills that actually go into daily management. It doesn't mean you're a phony about the message, but it means that it's more work to do the work than to talk about it. And it takes often a lot more than just flying a Trump flag and rallying for a person to go do your business, and then everybody goes back to the boat parties while the politicians work to try and do what they promised they were going to do. It takes a little bit of everybody to pull this kind of stuff off, especially when you're doing the kind of revolution we're talking about. You can't just talk about being a good person. You have to actually be a good person. And like with the case of the Snow White story, the evil queen has to actually be the most beautiful. You can't just talk about it, and then you can't seek to destroy those who turn out to be better than you by giving them a poison apple. In this case, it was the media that gave the evil queen a poison apple and said, "Look, there's someone prettier than you. Take this evil apple and kill her." The MAGA movement, to try and drive a wedge between the populist foundation of it and the day-to-day management, found a wedge in what essentially Vivek Ramaswamy said, and Elon Musk backs it up. You look at a couple of people who are very successful in life. Vivek was very personally successful. It's not just in investing, but actually running and employing people. You get to know kind of what's out there. Elon Musk, of course, has figured that out with his many endeavors that he does in business. You have to employ people and deal with people, and you find out, what kind of people are out there in the labor market. So it's one thing to talk about America first and jobs first, and it's another thing to actually find people to be in those jobs. So Steve Bannon was very much against Vivek Ramaswamy's message, and that's the War Room posse in general, which I agree with on almost everything. And I also understand the perspective on this H-1B visa issue, where you bring in skilled labor from other countries to fill a specific technological niche. And the Steve Bannon position, the War Room position, and the populist movement position, the one that sort of was able to recruit and bring in the labor movement to have unions back Trump, is jobs for Americans first. They'll bring all those jobs back in and make them for Americans, and use give them high wages, and don't cry about it, and go on, fulfill the jobs, bring them back home. That's part one of the story. Part two of the story is the reality of actually doing the work, and what is productivity and how do you measure it. So when you start getting people like Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk, and I totally understand their position, you got to measure work not in the way that labor unions measure them, but in the way that actual productivity gets done. So one of the points, one of the film references that is in the cold open for the War Room the other day, talking about this issue, was comparing the Chuck Yeager story in the movie The Right Stuff to what American workforce, what it is. And I totally understand the reference. That was a great movie by Paul Kaufman. I love the book by Tom Wolfe. When I was a little kid in darkened theater watching that particular scene that Steve Bannon obviously feels the same way about that I do, that shaped my life in a way. It was one of the more influential films in my life that shaped my young eyes to how I wanted to be as a person. And I grew up to essentially be that Chuck Yeager character in the movie The Right Stuff. I loved the way he handled the sound barrier so much that I went and formed my life around that type of mentality. Now, I've met Chuck Yeager in real life. I've met Scott Crossfield, who was kind of a rival test pilot with Chuck Yeager. Neil Armstrong lived nearby where I live. So I have had exposure to these kinds of people, and not to take anything heroic away from them, but when you meet them in real life, they don't quite live up to Phil Kaufman's idea of what the right stuff is. And when that movie was made, the book was written, the question was, what is the right stuff? What makes the right stuff? And is it truly American? Because you have to remember, we had Germans that were brought over after World War II to help us with the rocket program. We probably wouldn't have been able to build rockets without the Germans. So we had to bring in foreign labor to do it. So that's this H-1B visa situation has caused us to reflect. Look in the mirror and say, how fair am I? Am I beautiful? Tell me I'm so beautiful. And the mirror comes back and it said, how's the American labor force? And it come back and said, well, foreign labor's more attractive. Because foreign labor come from good, strong families, and foreign labor isn't out there abusing themselves with drugs. They're better educated. We have to face the fact that in the United States, we've allowed ourselves through divorce rates. We've been pummeled by all kinds of outside Marxist forces and elements that want to destroy our country, and they have destroyed us generation by generation. And now we have to admit to that. Now that you have an election that allows you to even have the conversation, we have to say, oh, we're not exactly what we thought we were. Were we ever that character that Phil Kaufman created for The Right Stuff, using Chuck Yeager as the template, that said to the Army when they or the Air Force when they came up to him and said, hey Yeager, we got all these guys that don't want to do the sound barrier. Slick over there is charging us a lot of money to do it as a private pilot. Would you be interested in breaking the sound barrier? And Chuck Yeager says, well, yeah, heck, I'll be there in the morning. And they said, well, what are you going to charge us? Because Slick's charging us a lot of money. Because it's a very risky, scary thing. Because the sound barrier at that time, people thought that you'd hit it with a craft and it would disintegrate in the sky. Chuck Yeager's like, heck, I don't even think the thing exists. And the Air Force is already paying me, so I'll be there. I'll show up. I'll have some breakfast, and I'll be there bright in the morning. And the military's astonished that they found a guy willing to go do it. And that's the right stuff. A person that does things for the right reasons. Not the union talk about, hey, let's have a collective bargaining agreement, and we're going to set the max amount of productive effort to the least ability that we have using the Marx model, and we're all going to get paid a lot of money to do the least amount of work. This Chuck Yeager idea proposed in The Right Stuff was you do things because it's the right thing to do, and that's the right stuff. And that's how you have the right stuff. And there was a lot of movie. It was really a good movie, and I understand why Steve Bannon used it, because I think he's thinking the same things I was when watching it. But what very few people really understood, if you read the book, which I did when I was young, and I read Yeager's autobiography, which I loved. I think I was a senior in high school when I read it. I was very inspired by it. And again, I was involved in things that put me in positions to meet these people in real life. And I was disappointed to find out they weren't so lofty in their private lives. And the people that actually talk to you were kind of rude and not as engaging as you'd like them to think they were, not as heroic as you'd like them to think they were. I remember I was very disappointed when I found out late in his life, after his wife died for a while, as a very old man, in his 80s, I think. He married a very young woman, Chuck Yeager did. It disappointed me, because I remember he had his wife's name painted on the plane of the X-1 when he broke the sound barrier. And, as far as I'm concerned, that kind of stuff stays with you for life. And it showed I think, a lapse in character as I watched him throughout his life. He wasn't quite that person that was made up in the movie The Right Stuff. He certainly had elements of that, but the movie was much more romantic than real life. And I think that's because you make movies based on what you'd want to be. And I think the MAGA movement set itself up to be the way that you want to be. But what is in reality is something you have to step into and build, and it's not always an ingredient that's already there. I think the ideas for what make the right stuff, to make the right workforce, to make America great again, the idea is certainly there. The practicality of actually implementing it is something you have to go and build. And can you build it with what you have? Or are you going to need help with it? Or are you going to need work with it? Or are you going to need to expand your territories? Do we need to make Mexico and Canada and Greenland 51st, 52nd, 53rd states? And my position all along, this goes back to something when I had a chance to talk to John Boehner about it as my congressman years and years ago, when he was Speaker of the House, saying we need to get out of the United Nations. We need to project to the rest of the world the American idea of freedom and glory and all the great things that you see in movies like The Right Stuff that are very patriotic. Around the world, what I found in real life is that there's a lot of people in the world who still like to work hard, and they want the American dream, and they love the broadcast they hear from the Voice of America, and they want to come and be part of that. And they often make very good employees. Whereas if you create a job, maybe you want to make hubcaps or rims for a car at some little aluminum alloy factory, and you're hiring people. If you hire a bunch of people from a bunch of repressed communities, you're likely going to get people who have drug problems, family problems, psychological issues, an entitlement culture. People have been taught all the wrong things through their education system, and they're going to become now employees for your system, and then they're going to work against any kind of productive enterprise because their minds just aren't right for the job. And you're going to, if you can bring some of those people in and try to be an equal opportunity employer and give everybody equal opportunity, but you're going to find that those types of people who have drug problems, they drink too much, they party too much on Saturday nights, they are on their second and third wives, you're going to find they're not very good employees. And they're going to drag down what it is you're trying to do as a productive enterprise. You want to see if you can get a hold of people who go home to their wives every night, or wives going home to their husbands, and that they actually they save their money when they earn it, and they don't blow it on everything that goes on. They certainly don't party on Saturday nights drinking too much, and they certainly don't have drug problems. They stay away from all that poison. They live pretty good lives, and that shows in the work they do. So that brings up the problem is, if you bring all these jobs back from the world that's been taken away from globalism, put them right back in our laps, do you have a workforce that can actually do the job? And based on my experience, I say no, you don't. And you're going to need to recruit people from wherever you can get them in the world to want to come and be Americans and do the American thing. That doesn't mean you go and give illegal immigration a free pass, and you got to do the mass deportations and make everything legal. But you need to be recruiting the world the best and brightest that you have, because they have the autonomy of personal freedom to build on. And if you think that the people who are in a depressed state right now are going to turn around and all of a sudden become good people doing good work and good productive jobs, you can't officially say that it's the best workforce in the world, because you have capitalism driving an economy and an expectation around the world that is not matched by productive output. You have people who just don't want to work past 5 o'clock every day. They want to work too little and get paid too much money for a lack of productivity. And then when you start dealing with collective bargaining agreements, again, they're built around the least common denominator. The ones who are the least effective are the ones who become the standard, and people who could do better don't do better because they don't want their brothers and sisters in the union to look bad in the effort. So they stick together and they equally perform poorly. And that's usually what you get. And that's why a lot of these big union shops go out of business. And the Trump America First policies will help make them more solvent, because there's less competition around the world for a while. But eventually you run into the productive output problem where they just don't work enough. You don't get enough hours out of the day to get everything you need done if you don't go to robots or AI or some other way to assist. So this old idea of what labor is and manufacturing is pre-globalism, and then how do you deal with fixing the globalism problem, putting those jobs back in your lap. You still have to actually have people who want to go do those jobs. And to Vivek Ramaswamy's point, you look at the TV shows and entertainment we have, and where they belittle the dads, they belittle families, they belittle good, productive lifestyles. They celebrate mediocrity. And if you want to have a good society, you need to be celebrating exceptionalism. I remember a few years ago, I did a radio show with a good friend of mine in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where we did a whole show on the problems of American exceptionalism. And you weren't allowed to even say it in the 2015s, 2016, 2017, because Trump was in the White House and he was bringing all this about, this idea of American exceptionalism, making the rest of the world feel bad. Well, that's why some people want to come to the United States, because they want to be on the good side, they want to be on the winning side. And we promoted that by putting our arm around it and saying American exceptionalism is a real thing, come be a part of it. So of course you had all these people flocking here who wanted an opportunity at the American dream, and those kinds of people tend to be the best employees, as opposed to people who were born in the United States but are victims of this massive attack of globalism to destroy the sovereignty of the United States, open borders, bad education system, poison through open borders, drug network, cartels, absolutely destroying our culture, lawyers making it too easy to get divorced and destroy the family, and the concept of taking the kids and putting them into school and letting the state raise them as opposed to the parents. All that stuff is really ran up a serious debt in moral authority, and those people are not going to turn around and be able to be great employees, just like in the film version of The Right Stuff. Chuck Yeager in real life, pretty good guy, did some good things, but he lived most of his life on the fact that he shot down a bunch of airplanes in World War II, and he had the guts to show up to break the sound barrier with broken ribs when he could have had every excuse in the world not to do it, and he did it for the simple price of what he was getting paid in his military salary. And the rest of his life pretty much benefited from having that kind of authenticity. One thing that was interesting about the end of The Right Stuff that Philip Kaufman put his hand on, as far as what is the right stuff, because even when that book came out, I went to seminars to meet all these people and kind of hear from Scott Crossfield himself, because Scott Crossfield was getting a little bit jealous of Chuck Yeager. There was a rivalry among the test pilots at the time that was very real. And I think Philip Kaufman caught it better than anybody with the way he filmed the end of The Right Stuff. When you had here's all the Mercury astronauts, some of them had been to space, some of them had not, but they basically were put into a tin can and launched into space to show they had the guts to do it, but they didn't have a whole lot to do as test pilots and skilled aviators. They basically just had to have the guts to trust the system and go along for the ride. And some of them were totally put into celebrity status. They behaved poorly. They had a hard time with celebrity status. You got these women that were throwing themselves at them. John Glenn was, of course, a good individual, tried to keep everybody rallied to a good moral cause. But there was rebellion among the ranks of the Mercury astronauts, the 7 of them at the time, and they, it wasn't easy. But were they heroes? Did they have the right stuff? Is it the right stuff to do what they tell you to do? Go sit in that thing and we'll launch you and you get all this credit and we'll buy you Corvettes and give you housing and put you on a celebrity track to sell the space program. And that's what right stuff is. But then at the end of the movie, they corresponded this party they were having for the Mercury astronauts. And then they showed where Chuck Yeager stole a plane essentially, and not the way it happened in real life. There was a series of tests that actually led up to it, just like it was when he broke the sound barrier. It didn't just happen in one day like they showed in the movie. It happened over a series of events. And he tried to break the high altitude record because that was the closest he ever was going to get to space. He had been overlooked his entire life with all his heroic escapades because he essentially didn't have a college degree. The NASA program was trying to sell it that you have to go out and get this pedigree and be this kind of person, and this is how you get into the ranks of having the right stuff. But the real right stuff was that while the Mercury astronauts were getting celebrated for just basically tagging along and doing what people told him to do, here was Chuck Yeager still striving to do the same thing he's always doing, achieving for greatness, trying to break some record, trying to push the limits of some aircraft. And he took that old Lockheed plane for the high altitude test to the limits of space, and it ran out of oxygen essentially and crashed. And he crashed. And he almost died in that crash. And the movie ended with him face broken, bloody, all messed up, still striving to push forward, while the Mercury astronauts were still trying to get their scheduled launches into space so they could advance, the space program. But the difference in heroics was the self-determination and the individual will that I think Steve Bannon loved so much about the film, and why I used that clip to say this is the American worker. When in truth and reality, mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? Most everybody ends up being like the Mercury astronauts. You might have some skill set, but you're really serving an institutional message. And that was when things were very healthy and good. And for as far as you had wholesome TV shows with lots of Westerns on that had values, people went to church on Sundays much more than they do now. They kept their families together. It was considered scandalous to see these astronauts were cheating on their wives. Those are low moral foundations for a good society. And that movie, The Right Stuff, dealt with it. And that was a movie set that went on in the 80s. That took place in the 40s and 50s and 60s. Looking back on itself in hindsight with a romantic twinkle of the eye. That's what we want to see in the mirror when we think about America. But what we really get is a lot of people, most people, and I can say that from personal experience because I'm one of those people that gets accused of having too many affiliations with too many people of foreign origin. By default, I happen to know a lot of people from other countries. A lot. I have a lot of interactions. Probably most of my interactions come from those kinds of people. And I've tried, and I've tried, and I've tried, and I've tried. Everybody knows I've tried to help people from, my region, people who are good old, that they kind of resemble that Chuck Yeager, get her done mentality. I've tried to help those people find greatness, and I'm talking hundreds, thousands of people like that, and most of them fall off the wagon pretty pretty easily. They don't have good, strong foundations. They have wonderful skills as people, but as far as the balance in their whole lives, they have trouble. They have trouble with drugs and alcohol. They have troubles with families. They have troubles with themselves. They have lots of problems, and those kinds of people are not the kind you can staff up a 200 or 300 person plant and expect the thing to work well. You just can't have a workforce that has that much dysfunction in it and expect it to work. You can process and prove it all you want, but the personalities are flawed and bad, and they're they're being horrible to each other because they're horrible to themselves. You just don't get a workforce that's ready for the kind of productivity that we're talking about with Making America Great Again. So if you're going to draw a hard line and say America first, well, what's an American? Is American the beat up 3 or 4 generation pattern we've seen where they've been completely destroyed and knocked off the rocker? Or are they the people who embrace the red, white, and blue and the American flag concept and want to fight for the American dream? And that's the argument we're having. That's why it's a discussion point. And of course, the media, Elon Musk was a Democrat. Vivek Ramaswamy, I know him a little bit. He's not a Democrat, but he has some liberal views that are quite clear to me. Collectivist views, but his family's from India, and Elon Musk is from South Africa, and these people are here to pursue the American dream. And there's a lot of those people out there. You don't expect them to understand why somebody, from some region woke up out of bed one day and put the flag out in front of their house and said, my job is more important than anybody else's in the world. You got to go out and fight for it. You got to go out and be good. You got to do great production in order to satisfy that requirement. You don't get it through entitlement. And too many people have been taught that's what happens. You're an American. You're entitled to this job. You don't have to fight for respect. You got to fight for respect every day. And just like the point of the right stuff. Reason why Chuck Yeager had the right stuff and nobody else did is because he stuck to his authenticity his entire life, as portrayed in the movie. And it ended with him even on the point of being destroyed and killed by it. He was fighting for authenticity while the rest of the Mercury astronauts that said yes to the program, they were brave in their own way and they were great in their own way. But they did what the institution told them to do, and they followed directions, and they were rewarded with unearned merit. And that is the kind of the recipe to the downfall of all society. And that's why the movie The Right Stuff was such a good one. And that's why it holds up even to this day. And it's I think an important way for us to look at what Making America Great Again is. When we talked about this as a populist movement, it was kind of a fantasy. Hey, could this happen? That'd be great. And it's easy for everybody to get on the same page. But now you have to actually implement it, and people have to kind of agree on what that looks like. And that puts us to looking in the mirror and asking the mirror, hey, mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all? Who is the best American of them all? And unfortunately, the mirror come back and said something we didn't want to hear. And people who work employing people out there in the world already knew the answer, because you can bring in a bunch of applicants, and the answer is going to be a lot of the people who are striving for the American dream, whether they're people who are from some farm milking cows at 5 o'clock in the morning in Iowa. Those tend to be pretty good workers. People who learn some good work ethics in the military, they tend to be pretty good workers. But unfortunately, a lot of people out there, especially on the domestic side, learned a lot of bad habits. They had fathers that left them. They had moms that were too busy to deal with them. They had education systems that let them down and taught them a bunch of Marxism, a bunch of garbage that they didn't need to know about. They have a lot of problems, and then they started experimenting with drugs and doing bad things when they were young, and rebelling from their parents to get away, and ran right into the clutches of big government, destroying their individual integrity and turning them into nice little Marxists. And they did it through depletion of their culture completely. So when Vivek Ramaswamy says the problem of all this is culture, you got to fix culture before you can fix any of it. It's going to take a lot. Not like you can push a button and fix everybody in a couple hours on a labor need you have that you need today. It's going to take decades to fix people, to get them their minds right. And I can say from my own experience that I've tried to put my arm around people who are broken, that have great skills, that they just don't, their minds are not quite there for pains and things that happen in their life. And I've tried to reform them and help them, but they just don't get it. They just don't listen. It's something that it's not like you're going to be able to put Trump optimism out there and people are going to just follow it. They might be receptive to it, but applying it to their own lives is going to be much harder for them. So then how do you go about getting labor to fulfill a market trend where you have a spike in jobs, you're running at low unemployment, and you still have an expanding economy that needs bodies in it? America first isn't the problem. It's getting qualified people who actually want to work and fight for the American dream that you got to put in places where you can expand that economy over the horizon. And that's what we're talking about here. And you can look in the mirror and see what you want. And that's, I think, what the Right Stuff movie was all about. Using Chuck Yeager as this is what we want to be. But what you often become is like the Mercury astronauts at the end of the film, who were living off unearned benefit, and which is the Phil Kaufman point of his movie and his screenplay. And in reality, we have too much of those traits currently to make America as great as we want it to be, because of the unearned benefit. Because we woke up and said, we're Americans, America first. Those are our jobs. Pay us a lot of money, and we're going to arrive at work at 8 o'clock in the morning. We'll leave at 5, and we live for our leisure time instead of thinking, I'm going to work 24 hours, 7 days a week to make my life better and those around me better, and I'm going to stay married to my wife. I'm not going to do drugs. I'm not going to drink alcohol. I'm not going to go get myself wrapped up in a whole bunch of debaucherous behavior. I'm going to do the right things for the right reasons. I'm going to buy a house, have a picket fence, and I'm going to stay married to my wife for 50 years and love her through sickness and health, hell or high water. And I'm going to show up for work and ask for every hour, every second of overtime I can get to live a good life. That's what we need. And that's essentially what Chuck Yeager was in The Right Stuff. When the military, he could have soaked everybody for millions of dollars in benefits to go be a part of the X-1 program to break the sound barrier, because the leverage was there for him to do it. But he took the salary. He said, look, your military's already paying me. I just want to fly planes, so I'll be there. I'll have some breakfast and I'll see you in the morning. And they were shocked that such a person existed. And to a large degree, Chuck Yeager did exist like that. That's what he was. They didn't lie about it, but I don't know that he was as wholesome as portrayed in that film. Again, I was let down by knowing things about him. Just like you get let down when you find out, okay, now we won an election. Now we're going to have an America first, and it's going to be wonderful. Let's get going. And then you're disappointed by the kind of people that are getting going with you, because they're not quite, they won, they rallied behind Trump, they flew the flags, and everybody said, we want to be this. Well, now do you have the courage to be that? And the answer is, you're often disappointed by the answer. And the mirror doesn't lie to you on the wall. It tells you what you maybe don't want to hear, and people are going to have a defensive reaction to it. And then, of course, the media is going to stoke that to try and divide it before we even get started. But there's going to be a lot of moments like this with Doge, government employees that think that they have a validated, unwarranted existence without merit, and they're going to be told their jobs aren't important. Get out. There's going to be a lot of hard feelings. There's going to be a lot of mirrors on the wall. And it's going to be a rough period for a lot of people. But it's good that we're going to have this discussion, because we've needed to have it for a long time. And I would say that if we really want to be the kind of America that was shown in The Right Stuff with the Chuck Yeager scene, then you have to have the courage to actually be that. And admit to yourself that, yeah, we had more than other places in the world, we have that tendency, but we never were quite what we wanted to be. We always fell a little short, and it's time to not be. And I think we elected President Trump because of his reputation for excellence, and having high expectations and pushing things further, and embracing exceptionalism. That's what we wanted out of him. That's why we put him back in the office after all that's happened. That's what we are fighting against. And I would say that we need to embrace that America and admit that we have to work harder, be better, not take things for granted if you really want to make America great again, or whether you just want to out leverage the rest of the world for a few years so you can get a bigger paycheck at the end of the week, or do you really want to be great? And I would say that's the defining line. And I personally, I'm signing up to, I want to be as great as possible. I want our country to be as great as possible. I want people to be as great as possible. But before you can be great and before you can make a great country, as a people, you have to be great. And you can't run around messed up, having bad problems, living dangerous, terrible lives, and expect a workforce to be the best in the world. The people need to be the best in the world before you can have a workforce that reflects that. And we have to dig deep and admit to ourselves that we have to go back to square one and rebuild it. And in the meantime, you got to find a way to fill all those great jobs that are going to be created from the expanding economy as globalism fails, and the people in the world who have hope and want to do well need an opportunity to live and embrace that American dream. And that's what we're all fighting for. Not the entitlement that I was born in a particular place and have an entitled job given to me because I happen to be an American, but because someone is willing to go fight for that red, white, and blue flag, and no matter where they come from in the world, and they're willing to work hard to make that a reality. That's the trick, and that's the task before us. And that's my position on it, why I defend Vivek Ramaswamy and his opinion. It might not be easy to hear, but it doesn't mean that you want to go kill Snow White just because the mirror told you something you didn't want to hear. Maybe make yourself more beautiful. Maybe go on a weight loss program. Maybe do something to make the mirror honestly tell you the truth instead of trying to kill off a rival because you don't want to do the work of being the most beautiful. That's what the problem with the evil queen was. The mirror is just telling you the truth. And we've had a mirror tell us something we didn't want to hear. I think Vivek Ramaswamy was that mirror, and people were mad at him over it, and the media's fanned the flames to try and destroy Doge and him before anybody gets roots into this new political movement. Before Trump's even inaugurated, try and derail everybody in the MAGA movement and get them fighting against each other, when really it's about truth that we're really dealing with here. And now that we've had the benefit of winning an election and enjoying the possibilities that come with it, now we still have to find a way to stick together and do the hard part of day-to-day management without the idealism of speculation of what could be. Now we have to deal with what is and how we want to make it into the image that we have in our minds, such as like the Right Stuff movie. How can we be that for real instead of just having it be an image captured through our imaginations? How do we make it true and real for the world to live by example? And I think that's what we're after now. Anyway, it's Rich Hoffman here. Share, subscribe, make tomorrow a better day. If you haven't read my book, The Gunfighter's Guide to Business, I think you'll love it. Anyway, have a good day. See you later.